It was just supposed to be a weekend getaway in Michigan's wilderness. It's nothing but trees, fresh air, and the crackling of a campfire under 1,000 stars. But as the darkness crept in, something else came alive. A pair of glowing eyes blinked from the edge of the forest, then another, and another. By midnight, the eyes were everywhere, watching, waiting, and they weren't alone. The campsite was perfect, or at least that's what Sarah thought when they first arrived. Tucked away deep in the heart of Michigan's northern woods, the forest seemed untouched. A pristine stretch of nature where civilization hadn't dared to disturb. The group had planned this trip for months. Sarah, along with her boyfriend Mark, best friends Jason and Leah, and her younger brother Matt. It was supposed to be their escape from everything's the noise, the deadlines, the stress of life. But as the fire crackled, sending up a shower of sparks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She blamed it on the isolation. Out here the silence was heavy, pressing in from every direction, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant rustle of leaves. Mark, ever the optimist, was the first to stand up, stretching and yawning. "All right, time to make s'mores," he announced, grabbing the marshmallows and a pack of chocolate from their supplies. Jason chuckled, swiping his phone for a quick selfie before joining him. "You're lucky. The rest of us are stuck in adulting mode." "While you're playing cavemen," Leah laughed, sitting cross-legged beside the fire. "I'm just glad to be away from the city. I need a break from the chaos." Matt, Sarah's younger brother, was standing near the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the woods. "It's so quiet out here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark tossed him a grin. "That's what you get for being out in the wild. Just wait till we re-roasting marshmallows and listening to the sounds of wolves in the distance." The others chuckled, but Sarah noticed Matt wasn't laughing. His gaze was locked on something in the distance, past the trees. She followed his eyes, but there was nothing to see but the black wall of the forest. "You okay?" she asked, moving closer. Matt tore his gaze away and forced a smile. "Yeah, just thought I saw something." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know." "Eyes," he muttered, his voice small. Sarah laughed softly, more out of discomfort than amusement. "Probably just a reflection from the fire." "There's nothing out here, Matt. We're safe." But something in his voice stuck with her. A thread of unease that wound tighter as the night deepened. Later after dinner, as the fire burned low and the others settled into sleeping bags, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were alive. She kept hearing things, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and every time she turned her head, she thought she saw movement in the shadows just beyond the firelight. But every time she blinked, it was gone. Then, as the darkness swallowed the clearing, it happened. A soft glow. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the firelight, but then it blinked. Just a flash of greenish yellow, barely visible in the distance between the trees. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She blinked again, trying to clear her vision, but the glow remained, hovering just outside the edge of the fire's reach. "Mark," she whispered, but the words felt wrong, like she didn't want to say them out loud. Mark, asleep in his bag, didn't stir. Sarah swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do. Should she wake the others? Should she go check? The thought of venturing out into the woods alone, especially now, was terrifying. But she couldn't stop herself from staring at the glow. It flickered again, not like firelight. It was too steady, too deliberate. And then there was another, 2 pairs of eyes, blinking, staring. She looked around, but the others were asleep, unaware, lost in their dreams. Sarah's skin prickled. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a trick of the light. Those eyes were real. She didn't dare move, too terrified to breathe too loud. Then the rustling came, sharp and purposeful, from deeper within the trees. Her heart began to race. The glow of the eyes began to shift. Slowly, as though something was moving just behind them. But what? The air grew colder. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared into the darkness, willing herself not to blink. The eyes were still there, 2 small glowing orbs, like fireflies that hovered unnaturally close together. They didn't move, they just watched. Chill crawled down her spine, spreading to her limbs, freezing her in place. The air had gone still, the sounds of the night muted in an eerie, unnatural silence. She couldn't tell how far away they were, but it felt like they were closing in. Then, a third set of eyes appeared, just slightly to the left of the first two. Her breath caught. This wasn't right. She had to wake the others. But as she shifted to turn, something stopped her. A rustling sound, soft and deliberate, came from deeper in the trees, farther away than the glowing eyes. And then, as if on cue, the first pair blinked. Slowly, deliberately. It was as though they were trying to communicate. Or maybe it was an invitation. A sudden burst of fear shot through Sarah, and she grabbed Mark's arm, shaking him awake. Mark, Mark, wake up. He groaned, clearly irritated at being pulled from his sleep. What? What's wrong? Look. She pointed into the darkness. But when Mark opened his eyes, the glowing eyes were gone, blinking at the empty night. Sarah, there's nothing out there. It's just your imagination. Just calm down. But Sarah couldn't calm down. The rustling in the trees persisted, now louder, more distinct. Something was moving out there, stalking the edges of their campsite, and it was circling them. Jason, Leah. She hissed, now shaking the rest of the group awake. Leah sat up, rubbing her eyes. What is it? I saw something, eyes. In the woods, they were watching us. Eyes. Jason scoffed, clearly not believing her. You mean like animal eyes or? No, Jason, not like that, Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with fear. They were glowing, greenish yellow, and now they're gone. Something's out there, I swear it. Matt, who had been sitting up on the far side of the fire, whispered in a shaky voice. I saw them too. I saw them before you did, Sarah. Leah frowned, her face pale. You're serious? Dead serious, Matt said, his eyes darting nervously to the trees. Maybe it was an animal, Jason suggested, although his voice was more uncertain now. No, it wasn't, Sarah replied. It was something else. The air grew even colder, and a low growl reverberated from the darkness, sending a shiver through Sarah's entire body. It wasn't an animal's growl. It was something deeper. Something human, but not. Then, from the edge of the trees, the first set of glowing eyes appeared again, only this time they were closer, much closer. And then a second pair, followed by a third. They were surrounded. The group froze, fear hanging heavy in the air like a suffocating fog. The fire crackled and snapped, but it felt insignificant now, like a fragile barrier between them and the darkness beyond. The eyes were everywhere, blinking in and out of sight, sometimes all at once, sometimes in pairs. But they never stopped watching. Do you hear that? Jason whispered, his voice strained. The growl from earlier was growing louder, closer. It was almost as though something was moving just beyond their sight, circling them like a predator. The eyes blinked in and out of the shadows, and Sarah swore she saw shapes moving within the trees, tall and indistinct, like figures swaying in the wind. But the wind had stopped. Mark grabbed a flashlight from their supplies and clicked it on, pointing it into the trees. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but an impenetrable wall of trunks and underbrush. He swept the beam across the clearing, but it came back empty. Nothing, he muttered, his voice shaky. Keep the light on, Sarah demanded, her voice hoarse. Keep it on the trees. Jason picked up a nearby branch and started swinging it nervously, as if to ward off the creeping fear that clung to the air. I don't like this. This is insane. A low, guttural voice suddenly pierced the silence. It was a whisper at first, so faint it almost sounded like a trick of the wind, but it grew louder and clearer with each passing second. It's coming, ... Mark turned sharply to look at Sarah. Did you hear that? Sarah nodded, her throat tight with fear. She'd heard it too. It wasn't just the growling any. More, it was a voice. And it was coming from somewhere deep in the woods. I don't want to be here anymore, Leah whispered, her face pale and twisted in fear. This isn't right. Matt, still wide-eyed and trembling, was the first to speak. Matt, we need to leave. We need to go now. But before anyone could react, the eyes were upon them. Dozens, no hundreds of glowing eyes, appearing suddenly from the depths of the forest, blinking in the darkness like a million stars coming to life. They were everywhere, and they were closing in. The group scrambled to their feet, fear flooding their veins like ice water. Mark was the first to move, his voice trembling. Everyone grab your stuff, we need to get out of here. Jason, wide-eyed, yanked at the straps of his backpack, his hands shaking. But as he turned to look into the woods again, the eyes were even closer. They moved in waves, a massive, undulating mass of glowing dots that flickered in and out of sight, almost as though they were following some unseen pattern. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the air thick with terror. The trees around them seemed to lean in, bending toward the group like ancient sentinels. And the woods felt alive, alive with something sinister. "Where do we go?" Leah cried, her voice breaking as she grabbed Sarah's arm. The growl from earlier rumbled through the ground beneath them. But now it was joined by something else shuffling, scratching, like something dragging itself through the underbrush. The eyes blinked faster now, like 1,000 tiny flames flickering in the dark. "Where do we go?" Jason repeated, his voice almost a hiss. Suddenly, there was a burst of movement. Something large, dark, and fast darted across the edge of their vision. Just a blur, but it was enough to send them all into a frenzy. "Run," Ronk yelled, grabbing Leah's hand and pulling her toward the path that led out of the campsite. But Sarah wasn't sure which way to go. The woods, once so inviting and peaceful, now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows, closing in on them from every direction. And the eyes, they were closing in too. The group ran, their steps clumsy and desperate, crashing through the underbrush, their breathing ragged and panicked. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as the glow of the eyes followed them. It's no longer hidden in the darkness, but out in the open now, blinking steadily, filling the woods with their cold, unblinking gaze. "Where are we?" Mark shouted, his voice frantic. "We're lost," Sarah said, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. "We're lost in the woods." There was no sign of a path anymore. The trees loomed over them, twisted and gnarled, like they were trying to trap them in their roots. The eyes kept blinking, shifting, moving. There was no escaping them. And then, Sarah heard it, a loud, sickening crack, like a tree splitting in two. The growl, the whispers. Everything intensified, and she turned to look behind her. They were closing in. It's the eyes, the shape, something was following them. Something was moving through the woods, faster than they were, faster than humanly possible. "Run," Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by a roar of pure terror that shook the very ground beneath them. The ground trembled beneath them as they stumbled forward. The eyes, those endless glowing eyes, were everywhere now, flickering in and out of the trees, like they were not just watching, but guiding them. Her mind raced. There had to be a way out. It couldn't just run forever. And then, through the trees, Sarah saw something, clearing ahead, a small moonlit glade. But it wasn't the clearing that caught her attention. It was the shape standing in the center. Figure. Tall, thin, and unnatural. Its body almost too elongated. Its face twisted and smooth, with no features at all. Just the glowing eyes. Thousands of them embedded in its skin, pulsating with a cold, eerie light. It was watching them. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment time seemed to stretch, every second dragging on like an eternity. The figure in the clearing stood perfectly still, its unnatural shape casting a long shadow under the pale moonlight. The eyes embedded in its skin shimmered, glowing in eerie synchrony with the forest's own glowing orbs. And as Sarah's breath caught in her throat, she realized it wasn't just watching them, it was waiting. "Run," Mark shouted, pulling Leah and Jason by the arms, urging them forward. But Sarah couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her legs heavy, her breath shallow and frantic as she stared at the figure. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Its skin was smooth, unnaturally pale, and its limbs stretched too long, too thin, as though it were something made from the shadows themselves. For a split second, the glowing eyes blinked as one, all at once. Then they flared brightly, like a signal, no longer separate but unified, almost like a single entity. "Sarah, move," Mark shouted again, his voice cracking with panic. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, stronger this time, as if the earth itself was alive, shaking in response to the figure. The figure's head tilted slowly, almost in curiosity, as if it had just noticed them for the first time. Then, without warning, it lunged forward with terrifying speed, covering the distance between them in an instant. Sarah screamed and tore her gaze away, snapping her head back to Mark. But it was too late. They were surrounded now. The eyes were everywhere. There was no escape. Jason tripped, falling to the ground, and the eyes surrounded him immediately. Sarah saw the fear in his eyes, a silent plea for help, but it was too late. The eyes in the darkness blinked once, and then Jason was gone. "Jason!" Leah screamed, falling to her knees. But there was no answer, no movement. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The sound of Leah's voice echoed in Sarah's mind as she pulled her attention back to the figure, now moving toward them, its long limbs reaching out, its glowing eyes filling the space around them. It was as if it was feeding on their fear, becoming more alive, more solid with every passing moment. "We need to run," shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her towards the trees. But Sarah couldn't move. Her body felt frozen in place, caught in the grip of the thing in front of her. Eyes were everywhere, hundreds, no, thousands watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. They were closing in, and the figure was right behind them, stalking them like prey. Leah was still on the ground, her hands clutching at her chest, gasping for air. "We can't outrun it," she cried. "There's nowhere to go. We're trapped." But Sarah didn't listen. She tore herself free from Mark's grip, her legs burning with the need to move, to escape, to get away from the thing in the clearing. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to run. But as she turned, she realized the woods were changing. The trees were shifting, bending toward her, like they were closing in. The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a trap. She stumbled forward, barely able to keep her footing. The eyes blinked once more, faster, brighter, as the air around her seemed to grow thicker, heavier. She could feel the pressure in her chest, as though something was pushing against her, forcing her down. And then, with a sickening crack, the ground beneath Sarah split open. The world seemed to collapse in on itself as Sarah fell. Her scream was cut off by the rush of air as she plummeted into the darkness below. For what felt like an eternity, she fell, weightless and disoriented, her heart hammering in her chest. But then, suddenly, her feet hit the ground, and she collapsed, gasping for breath. She wasn't sure where she was. It was pitch black, and the air was thick with dampness. The smell of earth and decay filled her nostrils as she pushed herself up, her hands shaking. She couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but she could feel the presence of the eyes, watching her, circling her, drawing closer. There was no escape. Panic surged through her as she stumbled forward, trying to find something, anything that would help her get out of the dark pit she had fallen into. But the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, and the walls of the pit closed in tighter, pressing against her. Then, as if the darkness itself was breathing, the eyes appeared again, their glow piercing the blackness. But now, they weren't just in front of her. They were all around her, crawling from the walls, from the earth, from the very air itself. Thousands upon thousands of eyes, all fixed on her, all hungry. "Please, ... double quote," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The eyes blinked once more, their light intensifying. The answer came not in words, but in the darkness, in the weight of the silence that followed. And then she understood. The eyes weren't just watching, they were waiting. The forest had never been alive before, but now it was. The eyes were the forest's heart, its soul, its hunger. It had been feeding, waiting for a time like this, waiting for her, for all of them to fall into its trap. The darkness around her pulsed, the walls of the pit closing in tighter. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The eyes, they were everywhere. They were all that was left now. And in that final moment, Sarah understood. They were never going to escape. The forest wasn't a place. It was a prison, an ancient thing that had existed long before humanity. And once it had you, you were never truly free. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness consumed her was the figure from the clearing, its body now fully materialized, towering over her like a god of shadows. Its eyes, those thousands of eyes, filled the space, blinding her, and nothing. The wind howled through the trees, but it wasn't the wind. There was something else in the forest, something that had been waiting for them, watching them. And now, as they made their way back down the path, it was following them, not in the woods anymore, not in the shadows, but closer, too close. It had been a dream trip for the group of hikers. It's a chance to escape the bustle of everyday life, to disconnect from the noise of the world, and reconnect with nature. Oregon, with its endless stretches of wilderness, seemed the perfect place for a weekend of adventure. The old forest path was an ancient trail, a relic from a time long forgotten. For most, it was just a name on a map. But for those who knew the tales, it was something more, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred. "Are you sure this is the right path?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She was the most cautious of the group, always questioning every decision. The others, lost in the thrill of the journey, barely noticed her hesitation. "Of course it is," said Ben, the group leader, flashing a confident grin. "I've been here before, it's a loop. We'll be back by sunset." Ben was an experienced hiker, but even he couldn't shake the unease that settled in his chest as they ventured deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller here, their trunks wide and twisted, their roots snaking like dark veins through the earth. A faint mist clung to the ground, giving the woods an eerie, almost otherworldly feel. After an hour of hiking, they stumbled upon a strange sight, a clearing with the remains of old stone buildings. It was as if time had forgotten this place, and the walls of the buildings were half collapsed, overtaken by ivy and moss. A town, but it wasn't on any map. No one in the group had heard of it. "Do you think it's abandoned?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was the most adventurous of the group, always ready for a thrill, but something about this place set her on edge. Ben nodded, but there was a tension in his shoulders. "It's probably been here for centuries. Let's explore, but stay close." "I don't like the look of this place." They split into groups, combing through the wreckage of the forgotten town. Most of the buildings were little more than rubble, but one structure stood tall, a church, its bell tower reaching for the sky. The door was ajar, inviting them in. Ben hesitated. "We should leave it alone. This place, something feels off." But Laura was already moving toward the church. "Let's just have a quick look. We've come this far." They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was overwhelming. Sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, casting eerie shadows across the decaying pews. There was something unsettling about the stillness, as if the building had been abandoned mid-service. It was Sarah who found it. Hidden behind an altar, a small weathered book lay on the floor, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the pages, and for a moment everything seemed to shift. "Look at this," Sarah said, her voice distant. "It's a journal. Someone was here." Ben's eyes narrowed. "Put it down. We don't know what we're dealing with here." But it was too late. Sarah's hand trembled as she flipped through the pages. "It's filled with ... notes. Warnings." The others gathered around her, peering over her shoulder. The journal was filled with strange symbols, cryptic messages, and mentions of the Watchers and the path that never ends. "What the hell is this?" Laura muttered, her heart racing. Ben's gaze flicked nervously to the door. "We should go now." But as they turned to leave, a low sound echoed from deep within the church, like a whisper, distant, yet unmistakable.
"Ow."
It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. The voice was faint at first, just a murmur, like the wind catching a distant melody. But it wasn't the wind. Ben stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The others, sensing the sudden shift in energy, turned toward him, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and unease. "What is that?" Laura whispered, her eyes darting around the church. But there was nothing except the crumbling stone and the heavy silence that had returned. I don't know," Ben stammered. His voice, usually so sure, wavered. It sounded like ... words. Sarah had dropped the journal by now, and her hand was trembling as she wiped her forehead. The chill of the air seemed to have deepened, settling over them like a fog. "Maybe it's just the acoustics," Laura suggested, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The church is old. Sounds travel weird in places like this." But even as she spoke, the whisper came again, clearer this time. And this time, it wasn't just a murmur. "Come closer, ... double quotes." It was soft, almost coaxing, and yet carried an underlying force, an undeniable command. The words were unmistakable, etched into the very air. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She didn't want to listen, didn't want to stay. "Let's just get out of here," she said, her voice shaking, but no one moved. They stood frozen in place, like moths drawn to the flame. Ben swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the source of the voice. "We need to leave now." But as he turned to walk back toward the door, something shifted in the air. The door, which had been open when they entered, was now closed. No creaking, no groan of old hinges. It was simply shut. Laura reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," she said, her voice thick with panic. No, Ben muttered, his fingers trembling as he pressed against the door. But it was as if something heavy and unseen was holding it shut. That's when the whisper came again, louder this time, as though it were right behind them. "Don't leave. It's not safe out there." The temperature in the room dropped, and for the first time they saw it. A shadow. It moved against the grain of the light, flowing across the cracked stone floor, like ink spilling from an overturned bottle. It was impossible. It couldn't be. They had all seen the shadows before, but this one, it didn't belong. It was too dark, too solid, too alive. It slithered across the room, creeping closer, its form twisting and curling like a mass of smoke. But the shadow didn't listen. It reached toward them, an unnatural presence, growing larger, pressing them back toward the altar. The air felt thicker now, as though the very walls of the church were closing in, and the shadow was feeding off their fear. The group backed into the altar, their backs pressed against the stone. It seemed like every corner of the church was closing in, the walls shifting, the shadows multiplying. "It's not real," Laura gasped, but the words were hollow. "This can't be real." But the shadow didn't care about her denial. It swelled, growing larger, its form becoming more defined. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had shape. It had intent. "Help," Sarah cried out, but her voice was swallowed by the thick air, her words lost in the dark. Ben's heart raced as the shadow took a step toward them, its form now towering over them, blocking out the last trace of light from the windows. The whisper came again, this time not from the walls, not from the air. It was in their minds. "You shouldn't have come," the voice hissed, its tone cold, cruel. "You've disturbed us. You will stay." Ben's eyes widened in horror. He understood now. This wasn't just a ghost. This was something older, something darker. It was a curse. Panic surged through Ben's chest. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing for certain. They had to escape. The door, the only way out, was still locked. They were trapped in this church with something far older than they could comprehend. The shadow loomed closer, its tendrils stretching toward them, like a spider's web hungry for prey. Ben's mind raced. There had to be another way out. Maybe there was a window they could break. Maybe before he could form another thought. A loud crack echoed through the church, breaking the stillness like glass shattering in slow motion. The shadow recoiled, as if it had been struck, then faded back into the darkness, retreating to the farthest corner of the room. It was gone, but the oppressive air remained thick and suffocating. The group stood motionless, sweat dripping down their faces. They had no words. None were needed. They all felt it, the sudden, all-consuming dread that pressed down on them like a physical weight. "What? What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice a strained rasp. Laura, still at the door, reached out one more time, her fingers desperately pressing against the wood. The lock gave way with a soft click. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the dark forest beyond. Without waiting for anyone to respond, Laura dashed out of the church, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The others followed, as if their legs moved on instinct, driven by sheer terror. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the clearing, but when they looked back, the church was gone. The trees were there, the thick woods stretching endlessly, but the old building, the town, everything they had just seen was no longer visible. Ben stopped, his chest heaving. "It wasn't a hallucination, right? You all saw it too?" "We saw it," Laura gasped, her voice shaking. "That thing, it wasn't just a shadow. It was alive." But Sarah, who had been silent since the shadow appeared, was staring at the ground, her eyes unfocused. "That's not what scares me." Ben looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" She raised her head slowly, her face pale. "The journal," she said, her voice barely audible. I think it wanted us to find it." The others looked at each other, unease crawling up their spines. "What do you mean?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Sarah swallowed. "Said something about the path that never ends. I think it meant the forest, or the town, and we're still on it. We haven't left. A cold realization gripped them all at once. The path they had been following, the trail they thought was just a hike, was no ordinary trail. It was a curse, an endless loop, leading them back to the town, to the church, to whatever had been waiting for them. And they had been foolish enough to think they had escaped. Ben turned back to the woods. We need to leave. All of us. We can't let it follow us again. But as they turned to go, the sound came again, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. And this time, it wasn't just from the forest. It was behind them. "Can't run," the voice echoed, just loud enough for them to hear. "The path is in you now." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around them, suffocating them. They turned back, faces pale, hands trembling. There, just a few yards away, the town reappeared. It was as if it had been there all along, hidden from their eyes by some dark force, until now. The buildings stood in ruin, the same ones they had seen earlier, though it seemed even more desolate, more oppressive now. But the worst part, the church was back. The door stood open, as though inviting them in, beckoning them toward their doom. "We have to go," Ben urged, his voice sharp with urgency. But no one moved. It was as if their feet were glued to the ground, as if the town had a magnetic pull, drawing them in. "No," Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on the church. "It's not just the town, it's following us. Yeah, we can't leave until we face it." A chill crawled up Ben's spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we have to finish what we started, have to go back inside the church." None of them wanted to, but they all knew it was the only way. The town had come to them, not the other way around. And if they didn't confront whatever was lurking inside, it would follow them home. With reluctant steps, they made their way back into the church, the door swinging shut behind them with an ominous thud. The room inside felt colder than before. The shadows were deeper, darker, and the silence was thick, like a suffocating fog. "What now?" Laura asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah, still holding the journal, approached the altar, her eyes scanning the pages frantically. "There's something we're missing," she said, her voice tight. "Something in here tells us how to end this." But before she could read further, the whispering voice returned, louder this time. "You're already too late." The words hung in the air like a curse, a final warning. "You're already too late." The voice wasn't in the walls this time. It was inside their minds, a heavy, oppressive presence that pressed down on them, making it difficult to breathe. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a command, an inevitable truth. Ben felt his stomach twist into a tight knot. "No, we're not too late. We're not." But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of those words sinking into him, into them all. The forest, the town, the church, they were all part of something larger, something far older than any of them had imagined. And it wasn't just a town, it was a prison. "Sarah, you have to read the rest of it," Laura urged, her voice frantic, her eyes wide with fear. "There has to be a way out, something in there. Please." Sarah clutched the journal tightly in her hands, her eyes scanning the pages with frantic desperation. I don't understand it all. There's something about an offering, a ritual, a sacrifice." The word echoed in the silence like a bell tolling, and the very air around them seemed to thicken. The shadows, once just dark shapes, now seemed to have substance, crawling toward them with intent, as if drawn by the very mention of the word. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. "Sacrifice? What are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was hollow, distant. "The journal. It says that to break the curse, someone must offer themselves. The town feeds on that sacrifice. It's how it survives, how it keeps them bound." Laura's breath caught in her throat. "Don't mean I don't know," Sarah cut in, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. "But if we don't, if we leave now, if we don't finish what was started, we'll become a part of it. The path will never end for us." Ben felt his legs grow weak beneath him. He could hear it now, that whisper again. But it was no longer just in the church. It was in the air, outside, following them like a dark cloud. Something was coming. Something was waiting. But the worst part, they were trapped. The doors were locked, the windows boarded up. The town, the church, it was alive with their fear. No, Laura's voice was small, trembling. "We're not going to sacrifice anyone. There has to be another way. We'll fight. We'll find a way out." Sarah closed her eyes, shaking her head slowly. "We can't fight it. We can't fight what's in here. It's been here for centuries. The only way out is through the path. And it's ... too late for us. I can feel it. The forest has claimed us." As the words left her lips, a sharp screech echoed from the darkness, and the walls of the church seemed to pulse, as though the building itself was alive. The temperature dropped again, colder than it had been before. A thick, suffocating fog began to seep from the cracks in the floor, swirling around their feet, binding them to the earth. Ben staggered backward, his hands pressed to his temples. "No, I won't. I won't let this happen. Or not." But then, he saw a shadow again. Only this time, it wasn't alone. The church had become filled with them hundreds of twisted, writhing forms, each one a shadow with a flickering, indistinct shape. They hovered near the walls, near the altar, growing larger and darker with every breath they took. Then, in the midst of them, a figure emerged from the center of the fog, a figure cloaked in black, its face hidden behind a veil of shadow. "Welcome back," the voice said, its tone thick with malice. "We've been waiting for you." Ben took a step back, his mind racing. "No. ... please. We didn't mean to disturb you." "You shouldn't have come," the figure interrupted, its voice echoing through the church, reverberating in their bones. "But now you're here, and the path has been set. The sacrifice must be made." Sarah dropped the journal, her hands shaking. She stepped forward, her voice pleading. "Please, ... there has to be another way. It has to be something we can do." The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. "The path is always open, always leading to the same place. And once you enter, you cannot leave. It's the price for the knowledge you seek. It's the price for disturbing the town." A cold chill swept through the room. For a moment, it felt as though the air itself had stopped moving. The shadows seemed to swell, pushing against them, pressing them back toward the altar. Laura's breath caught in her throat. "What do you want from us?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. "You've already given what's needed. The offering has been accepted. The path is now yours." Ben felt his heart stop. "What do you mean?" The figure smiled, or, at least, it seemed to, although the smile never reached its eyes. "You've all been marked. The town doesn't let go. It never does. You wanted to leave, but the path you've walked isn't your own anymore." A scream echoed through the church, but it wasn't from anyone in the group. It was from the shadows, from something deep within the darkness of the church's bowels. Ben's stomach churned. "You're trapped." "You're not trapped," the figure said, its voice soft now, almost a whisper. "You've already left." But the town doesn't forget. They turned to run, but the church had changed. The walls were no longer the same. The door had vanished, leaving only a smooth, impenetrable surface where it once stood. The town outside was gone, to replace by a thick, dense fog that had risen from the ground, wrapping itself around their ankles. Ben pushed against the walls, his hands slick with sweat. "We need to get out. We need to." But then he stopped. He could feel it. The town, the path. It was here. It was within them. Ben stood frozen, his back pressed against the cold stone wall. The shadows had grown thicker, moving now like living things, swirling around them. He felt a tightness in his chest, a growing pressure in the air that made it harder to breathe. "We're not leaving, are we?" Laura's voice was barely a whisper. Ben didn't answer. He didn't have to. They all felt it, the pull, the suffocating weight of the town around them. The fog outside seemed to be closing in on the church, and the shadows, those dark entities, began to crawl closer, inch by inch, toward them. "They've marked us," Sarah said, her voice trembling, but there was an edge of realization in her tone. "The path never ends. We thought we'd leave, but the path followed us. It's part of us now." Her words struck like a hammer, and for a moment it felt as if the very ground beneath their feet was trembling in response. The church's walls seemed to lean in, suffocating them, pulling them closer to the altar. Ben turned to the others. "We have to make it stop. Whatever we have to do, we can't just stay here. But even as he said it, he knew it was too late. The town was in their blood now. It had already claimed them. They were walking the path, whether they liked it or not. And something else, something darker, was watching. The figure in the corner, the one cloaked in shadow, stepped forward again, its form rippling like liquid darkness. It was taller now, its outline growing more solid, as though it were feeding on their fear. "You can't leave," the figure intoned, its voice low and heavy. "You are part of the town now. The path is yours, as it was always meant to be." Ben's eyes flicked toward the altar, and his breath caught. The altar, once a simple stone fixture, was now pulsing with a sickly glow. Symbols had appeared on its surface, carved into the stone, glowing faintly. They were like the markings in the journal, the same symbols that had haunted their steps. Laura's face twisted with horror. "What is that?" Sarah stepped forward slowly, her eyes locked on the altar. "It's a ritual, the path. It's a trap. It wants us to offer ourselves, to become part of the town. The offering isn't just blood, it's our souls." Ben shook his head, his mind spinning. "No, we're not doing that. We can't." But as if on cue, the shadows seemed to stretch out and wrap themselves around him, pulling him toward the altar. His heart raced, and for the first time since they had entered the forest, he felt helpless. The town had him. It had them. "Help me," Ben shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the echo of the whispering voice, which now came from all directions. "Help you? You are already ours," the voice hissed. "The town never lets go." It was then that Ben realized the truth. The town, the path that had been waiting for them. It had always been there, lingering on the edge of their minds, drawing them in slowly, quietly, until it was too late. They had been chosen, marked by the forest long before they had set foot on its ancient trail. And now, the path would follow them wherever they went. The altar loomed before them, the symbols glowing brighter now, their light pulsing in rhythm with the beat of Ben's heart. The shadows were closing in from every side, and the figure, the dark, cloaked being, was standing in front of them, a towering presence that seemed to block out all light. "You've come to the end," the figure said. Its voice was soft, almost sympathetic, but its eyes gleamed with something darker. "The path never ends. Not for you. Not for anyone who walks it." Ben felt a wave of despair wash over him, heavy and suffocating. His legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees. He could hear the others behind him, their breath coming in shallow gasps, but there was no escape. The path had already begun to pull them into its web. "This isn't how it ends," Ben gasped, his voice barely audible. "We're not." But the figure stepped forward, and in that instant, everything went dark. The church, the town, the forest, they all vanished, leaving only a void, a cold, empty blackness that swallowed them whole. The last thing Ben felt was the pull of the shadows, a tugging sensation in his chest, as if something was yanking him deeper into the dark. And then nothing. The group was never found. No trace of them remained. The town, once forgotten, had swallowed them whole, and the forest returned to its silence, its mysteries left undisturbed. But the path remained, and somewhere in the darkest corners of the forest, the faintest whispers could be heard, beckoning to those who would venture too close. The path that never ends. It started with a whisper. No, not a whisper of voice, soft but insistent. It drifted through the trees like a shiver crawling down your spine. "Come closer," it beckoned. "You're almost there. It's just a little further." But when Nick turned, there was nothing. No one. Only the endless stretch of the black woods, as dark and suffocating as the night itself. He didn't know it then, but he was already lost. Nick Walker had always loved the woods. Hiking was his escape, his way of shutting out the world, of leaving behind the noise and chaos of city life. So when he decided to take a solo trip into the black woods of Pennsylvania, he thought it would be just another peaceful weekend in nature. The black woods had a reputation, an infamous one. People often spoke of the eerie quiet, the thick, oppressive air, and the strange things that happened if you strayed too far off the beaten path. But Nick was the type who didn't believe in stories. He was practical, grounded. Those were just local legends. He'd heard them before. The truth was, Nick needed this. Work had been stressful, and his life had felt like a whirlwind of endless responsibilities. A weekend in nature, away from everything, seemed like the perfect way to reset. The trail was supposed to be easy, simple loop that led to a scenic overlook. But now, standing at the base of a towering oak, Nick realized something. The forest didn't look quite the same as when he had started. Trees, thick and twisted, loomed above him like sentinels. The sunlight barely broke through the canopy above, casting the woods in a perpetual twilight. The path seemed to stretch on further than it should, curving in ways Nick didn't recall. The map in his pocket wasn't much help either. Its creases had worn thin. And the landmarks he should have been seeing weren't where they should be. He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. Get a grip, he thought, taking out his phone to check the GPS. No signal. Of course, a little off the grid, but that was to be expected. Still, it didn't sit right with him. The unease gnawed at the pit of his stomach. I'll turn around soon, he thought. Just a little further. The path twisted again, curving left, then right. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like dark hands. Nick's heartbeat quickened. Something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching him. It started as a faint murmur, so quiet that he thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, louder this time, Nick. It was his name, clear and cold, like a breath against his ear. His heart skipped a beat. He spun around, eyes darting through the trees. But there was no one. No one at all. He shook his head. Get a grip, he thought. You're just imagining things.
Oh.
But the voice was insistent. Come closer, it whispered again. We've been waiting for you. Nick froze, his breath catching in his throat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was no mistaking it. Now the voice was real. It was coming from somewhere in the woods, somewhere deep within the trees. Something was calling him. Something or someone. He tried to shake it off, but he couldn't. His feet moved of their own accord, pulling him deeper into the forest. The path had long since vanished, replaced by underbrush and tangled roots. The trees, dark and gnarled, seemed to shift and sway like they were alive, watching him. Come deeper, the voice coaxed. Come closer, Nick. The air grew colder, and Nick's breath began to fog in front of him, even though the temperature wasn't that low. His footsteps quickened, though he wasn't sure why. He didn't want to go deeper, didn't want to listen, but it was as if something was pulling him, compelling him forward. The forest closed in, and he stumbled over roots and rocks, his heart pounding. He was no longer certain of the direction he was going, but still, the whispers followed him, growing louder with every step. The voice was clearer now, almost tangible, as though it were right behind him. He spun again, panic rising, but the woods were as empty as before. His body trembled. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to find his way out, but his legs wouldn't listen. They kept moving faster now, towards something he couldn't understand. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Nick was far from the trailhead. The forest was enveloped in an unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that presses in on you, suffocating you with its weight. He tried to make a fire, but the damp wood refused to catch. The only light was from his flashlight, which flickered every few seconds as though it, too, was unsure about staying on. Nick sat on a rock, staring into the darkness. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. He hadn't seen any wildlife, no rustling leaves, no animal calls. It's only that cold, unyielding silence. Then he heard it again, the whisper, Nick. It was so close this time, as if someone were standing right behind him. He spun around, flashlight darting through the dark, but again there was no one there. Just the trees, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers in the dim light. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, but the whisper didn't stop. Come closer, it beckoned. We need you. His heart raced, and sweat trickled down his brow, even though the night air was cool. The voice was familiar now, almost comforting, as though it had been calling him for ages. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Shivers ran down his spine. He stood up quickly, grabbing his pack, the panic rising in his chest like bile. He needed to leave. He needed to get back to the trail. But as he turned to leave, the darkness around him thickened, pulling him in, and a figure appeared at the edge of his flashlight's beam. It was blurry at first, its features indistinct, but then it became clearer. A man, or something that resembled a man. His eyes were hollow, black like deep pits, and his skin was stretched tight across his bones. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at Nick with an empty, pitiless gaze. Nick's heart lurched in his chest. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stepped forward, its footsteps slow and deliberate. And then, with a cold, almost robotic voice, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here, Nick. You shouldn't have come back." Nick stumbled backward, his mind racing. What was this? Was it real? His pulse thudded in his ears. The figure reached out for him with a skeletal hand, its fingers elongated, twisting unnaturally. But before it could touch him, the light flickered again, and the figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the whisper behind. "Come deeper." Nick couldn't explain what had just happened. He couldn't tell if he was dreaming or if he was losing his mind. He had to get out. He needed to find the trail, find his way home. But everything around him was wrong. The trees looked different now, their shapes too sharp, too jagged. The air felt heavier, thicker. It wasn't just the lack of sunlight, it was something else. The forest wasn't just an empty place. It had secrets, dark, ancient secrets that had been buried for years. Nick's mind kept returning to the stories he'd heard, the ones he dismissed as local legends. He had never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything supernatural. But now the voice returned, louder than ever. "You're getting closer. You're almost there, Nick." He looked down at his hands, trembling uncontrollably. He wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. His body was rooted to the spot, frozen by the terror coursing through him. "Closer," the voice whispered again, just behind him. "Closer." The words were like a spell, weaving themselves into the very fabric of his thoughts. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog in his mind. What was happening to him? Why couldn't he think straight? As his thoughts swirled, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate pace. Someone was coming. Someone or something. His throat tightened, and he looked around in desperation. But the forest was completely still.
Ow.
The trees didn't move. The whispers stopped. Nick turned around, ready to confront whatever was lurking behind him.
Ow.
But there was nothing there. Nick's body felt heavy, like something was pressing down on him, urging him to stay. But the rational part of his mind, the part that wasn't completely consumed by fear, screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible.
What?
Yet, when he tried to move, his legs felt like stone. It was as though something was holding him in place, preventing him from escaping. "Why are you running?" The voice hummed softly like a lullaby, caressing his mind. "There is no way out, not for you." The trees around him shifted, their twisted branches creaking in an unnerving harmony. It was as though they were alive, listening, waiting for something, waiting for him. Nick's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he finally managed to turn around, his flashlight trembling in his hand. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the deep, suffocating silence of the woods. Then, something moved. A figure emerged from the shadows. No, not a figure, but something far worse. A presence. It pressed in on him from all sides, invisible, yet suffocating. His body went cold, his thoughts a jumble of fear and confusion. Was this it? Was he going to die here, alone in the black woods? The air shifted. The trees seemed to lean in closer. The woods were closing in around him now, the shadows pressing in on all sides. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. He didn't know where the figure had gone, but he knew it was still out there, lurking just beyond the light of his flickering flashlight. Nick moved quickly, taking a few steps back. He needed to find a way out, to break free from whatever force had him trapped in this nightmare. The trees were too thick to push through. Every direction seemed to lead deeper into the woods, the whispers guiding him, pulling him, and he hated every second of it. The silence was gone, now replaced by something far worse. The quiet was suffocating. The air was thick with dread. He stumbled backward again, his hands outstretched, trying to keep himself steady. The ground beneath him was uneven, and the roots twisted and shifted like something alive. Nick's foot caught on one of them, sending him sprawling to the ground. He tried to catch himself, but the force of the fall knocked the wind out of him. The flashlight flew from his hand, bouncing on the damp earth before rolling into the dark. He lay there for a moment, dazed, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him, growing longer with every passing second. Then it happened. A voice, low, guttural, and ancient, echoed from all around him. "We've been waiting for you, Nick." Nick's blood ran cold. His pulse thundered in his ears as he scrambled to his feet. He had to get up. He had to get out of here. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, but his body felt heavy, sluggish, like it didn't belong to him anymore. He was being dragged deeper into this hell. "We are the Watchers." The voice was both everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating inside his skull. "You've been called here? Just as others were before you." Nick's eyes darted around in the dark, trying to spot the source of the voice. But all he saw were the endless rows of trees, tall, ominous, and dark. His mind raced. What was this? What were they? The Watchers? Were they spirits? Demons? He couldn't think straight, his head spinning from the terror. "Closer," the voice whispered, much closer now, as though the words were being spoken in his very ear. "You must come to us, Nick. You cannot leave." He blinked, trying to fight the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. Part of him, the rational part, screamed that he had to leave, that he couldn't trust whatever was happening here. But the other part, the part that was trembling with fear and confusion, felt the pull. Something in the forest had its claws in him, and he wasn't sure if he could fight it. Suddenly, a shift in the atmosphere. The shadows seemed to part before him, revealing a path. It was as though the forest itself had opened up to him, guiding him toward something. Nick hesitated. Part of him screamed to run the other way, but the voice was too strong, too insistent. "Come deeper." His feet moved of their own accord. It was like the forest was controlling him, bending him to its will. Nick tried to resist, but the pull was too great. His legs refused to listen. He took a step forward, then another, and then another. "Mines." His mind screamed in panic as the trees seemed to grow taller, darker, closer. The path ahead was winding, the shadows so thick now that he could barely see. His flashlight had long since died, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The trees, twisted and gnarled, seemed to shift and move as if they were alive. Nick's heart thudded in his chest. He was no longer sure where the path was taking him. Was he even moving forward anymore, or had he somehow circled back? The woods were endless, like they had no end, no beginning. "You've come this far. You're almost home." The voice was everywhere now, wrapping around him like a noose. Nick felt his knees tremble, his mind shattering under the pressure. It was too much. He couldn't take it anymore. He looked up. There ahead of him was something, a clearing, a place where the trees seemed to part, revealing a wide expanse of ground. At the center, a large stone sat smooth, dark, and covered in moss. It looked out of place, as though it didn't belong in the natural world. Nick's breath hitched. He moved closer, his body moving of its own accord. The stone seemed to call to him, its surface slick with moisture. It looked like an altar, an offering place for something ancient and wicked. His mind screamed that he needed to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible, but the voice kept pulling him, urging him closer to the stone. "It is time," the voice said softly. "The offering is yours now." Nick's eyes darted around, looking for some way out, but there was nothing, just the stone. Just the dark, suffocating woods around him. He was trapped. He had no choice but to approach the stone. His hands reached out, trembling as they brushed the cold surface. As soon as his skin made contact with the stone, a shock ran through him, cold, burning, and deep. He cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the night. The whispering voice echoed in his mind again. "You will join us, Nick. You will never leave." Nick's head swam as the sensation from the stone spread through his body. It was like 1,000 icy fingers had dug into his skin, and the chills seemed to radiate deep within his bones. His entire body went stiff, paralyzed by the cold and the overwhelming presence that seemed to press in on him from every angle. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a cacophony in his mind. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. His arms felt like they were bound to the stone, trapped in some ancient, twisted ritual that he couldn't understand. The voice continued its haunting chant. "You have entered the place of the Ancient Ones. You have come to offer yourself to them." To us, the words felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, crushing him. Nick tried to open his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, and the air seemed thick and suffocating. "Don't fight it, Nick," the voice whispered soothingly, like a lullaby, a voice that felt familiar but ancient. "We're meant for this. You are a part of us now." Nick's body was no longer his own. The pull from the stone, the voice in his head, had consumed him. His vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to warp and twist. He couldn't tell what was real anymore. Shadows grew darker, the trees closer, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, watching. Then something began to form in the air before him. At first it was indistinct and dark, shifting shape. But as the seconds stretched into eternity, the form became clearer. The darkness took shape, turning into something that resembled a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs long and grotesque, its face hidden in the darkness. But Nick could feel its eyes on him, cold, calculating. It spoke, its voice like the crackling of dry leaves. "You are the chosen one, Nick. You will remain here forever, as we have all remained. You will become one of us, the Watchers of the Woods." The figure stepped forward, and Nick felt the weight of his own soul. Heavy, burdened, as though it was being drawn out of him. "Welcome home." Nick's body trembled uncontrollably, his entire being engulfed by the presence of the figure before him. The words it spoke were hollow and suffocating, each syllable digging into his mind like an iron nail. His legs shook, but his body was frozen, rooted to the stone like a prisoner locked in his own flesh. He was powerless, and the realization was a crushing weight upon his chest. The forest around him seemed to come alive, the trees twisting and bending as if they were drawn to the figure, to him. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, beating in time with the whispers that now filled every corner of his mind. "You are the offering," the voice echoed inside him. "You are what has been chosen. This is your destiny." His vision blurred as he tried to shake the words out of his head, but it was impossible. The figure before him was too powerful, too ancient. It was like a shadow, but it was more than just that. Tit was a part of the forest, part of the earth, part of the very darkness that had claimed this place long before Nick had ever set foot in it. "Do not fight," the figure intoned again, its voice low, almost comforting, like a lullaby. "You have been called here for a reason, Nick. You belong to us now." Nick tried to scream, but the words died in his throat, choked off by the suffocating grip of the forest. His mind was unraveling. There was nothing left, no escape, no hope. Only the oppressive darkness, the figure before him, and the overwhelming sense of being consumed by something ancient and terrifying. As if on cue, the trees around him creaked and groaned, their bark shifting like old skin. The branches stretched toward the figure, toward Nick, like claws, their gnarled fingers reaching out for him. He could feel the eyes of the forest on him, watching him, waiting for something. He didn't know what. The figure took a step forward, its long skeletal hand extending toward him. "It is time," it said, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The offering must be made." Nick's body refused to obey him. His limbs felt like they were made of stone, incapable of moving, incapable of fighting back. He wanted to run to break free, but there was nothing left inside him to fight with. The weight of the ancient force in front of him was unbearable. It was being consumed, not just physically, but spiritually. His soul, his very essence, was being taken from him. "This is your destiny," the figure repeated, as though it were trying to soothe him. "You are part of the woods now. You will never leave. You will join us in the darkness." A cold hand clasped around Nick's arm, and he let out a strangled gasp. The fingers were sharp, like bone, but they didn't hurt. They simply held him, still, like a puppet held in the hands of something far older and more powerful than he could ever comprehend. He tried to fight, but his mind was collapsing, his thoughts spinning out of control. The voice in his head was growing louder, drowning out everything else. "You will be one of us, Nick. You will never escape. You are a part of the Black Woods now, forever." He felt the cold hand move to his chest, pressing against his heart. The weight of it was unbearable, suffocating. He gasped for breath, but the air was thick, like he was breathing through a wet cloth. It was hard to think, hard to breathe. All he could hear now was the voice of the forest, the voice of the Watchers. Suddenly the hand released him. Nick stumbled backward, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the force of it. But the voice didn't stop. It never stopped. It was in his head, in his blood, in his very soul. "You are ours now, Nick. You will never leave." Nick fell to his knees, his head spinning. He tried to lift his hands, but they felt so heavy, so disconnected from him. He could feel his body being pulled into the stone beneath him, his skin tingling as though it were merging with the earth. The woods were alive. The trees were alive. The figure was alive. He looked up, and the figure was gone, but the presence remained. The air was thick with it. The shadows pressed in from all sides, filling his vision, enveloping him. The forest, the trees, the very ground beneath him, all of it, seemed to hum with ancient, malevolent energy. It was like something was waiting, something was watching. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his voice lost in the suffocating silence. All he could do was breathe, ragged and uneven, as the darkness closed in around him. Nick's vision swam, flickering in and out of focus, his head pounding with the weight of the forest's presence. The air was thick, oppressive, and it seemed to close in on him like a vice. His body felt numb, his limbs stiff and unresponsive, but somehow he could still feel the pull, the dark force that had him trapped in this nightmare. He wanted to scream, wanted to tear himself free from this hellish place. But deep down he knew it was pointless. He'd already been claimed. The voice of the forest, the whispers, the figure, was all part of something ancient, something that had been waiting for him, waiting for someone. The stone beneath him was cold, and the air had a damp, earthy scent, like old soil. His eyes darted around the clearing, but there was no escape, no exit. Just the trees, the shadows, and the presence that seemed to hang in the air, suffocating him with its weight. The darkness was getting deeper now. The trees around him seemed to close in tighter, their branches twisted and gnarled, their leaves dark like rot. The air felt heavier with each passing moment, as though the forest was inhaling and exhaling with him, drawing him deeper into its grip. Then, a soft sound broke the silence. A voice, distant but clear. "You have been marked." Nick's eyes snapped open. The voice was coming from behind him. He turned around, but all he saw were the trees, their twisted forms stretching high above him. The air was thick with a sense of doom, but there was something else, something familiar. It wasn't just the forest that was watching him. It was them, the watchers. The ones who had been waiting. They were all around him now, hidden in the darkness, their eyes trained on him, waiting for him to understand. "You belong to the Black Woods now," the voice continued, "just as we always have. Forever bound by the trees. Forever bound to the darkness." Nick's breath caught in his throat. The realization hit him like a wave. The Black Woods weren't just a place. They were a curse. A living, breathing entity that claimed those who wandered too far into its depths. And now, he was one of them. He'd been claimed by the woods. The voice whispered one last time, "Welcome home. Nick, welcome to the Black Woods." And just like that, Nick was no longer part of the world he once knew. He was a part of the forest, one of the watchers, trapped forever in the darkness of the Black Woods, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to step into its depths.